No further introduction. You've had a long day, my friend, haven't you?
Well, I was glad to be there to talk about Jimmy. It was painful because I haven't seen him since his wife died. You know, he
I know when Gloria
retired.
passed away, right?
That's more than a year ago, and as far as I know, he stayed in the house all the time. But I'm proud to have known him. I'm even prouder to have worked with him, and he left a mark behind.
Let's talk about what you did with him. You worked together for Cecil B. DeMille on
Yes.
The Greatest Show on Earth. You were the circus manager, and he was a clown. Yeah.
And it was my second film, so it was, you know, very significant thing for me, and it was very valuable to not, of course I knew what a wonderful actor he was. I'd been looking at his films for years, but I was just beginning to have some kind of public identity. And that's hard to do, to learn to be a public actor.
Mm-hmm.
And Jimmy had been doing it for years, and you just watched him on the set, the way he behaved to people, and you thought, that's the way to do it. You know, show up on time, know your words, don't bump into anything,
Yeah.
and never yell at anybody. And
Did you ever bump into anything while he was there?
yeah, I did, as a matter of fact. The first shot I did in the movie, I was driving a Jeep around the circus ring and stopping and jumping out, and I'm going to tell Betty Hutton not to do a stunt that she was doing. I told her not to do. And Jimmy was in the scene riding in the Jeep. And I drove the Jeep to the mark and leaped out and tripped over the ring curb. I fell in the sawdust. This is my first shot in the whole movie.
With Betty Hutton and Jimmy Stewart, right.
And Cecil B. DeMille. And he said, Chuck, I don't think that's quite what I had in mind. Would you do another take on that? So we're driving back, and Jimmy said, well, Chuck, it can only get better from here.
You know the line that we've all heard over the years, ready when you are, CB.
Yeah.
Was that ever actually said?
No, but it's the only joke that DeMille always thought was very funny. It's an apocryphal story, but it's a funny, very funny story.
Well, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Well, it's when we were shooting in Egypt on 10 Commandments, and we were covering the Exodus, for which we had 8,000 people and 5,000 head of livestock, and I don't know how many.
Just a lot going on.
Yeah. And going out through the Sphinxes. And you could only get 3 setups, 3 shots on it in a day. It took so long to get the people back to the beginning. And so DeMille got it all set in the story. And he had 3 cameras. That's true. They did have 3 cameras in different places. And according to the story, it took about a whole reel of film to get everybody by. And so he waited till it was over and then cut. And he turned to the close camera, and he said, how was that, Fred? And Fred said, Mr. DeMille, he said, we had great stuff, but he said the film jammed just 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes. He said, we didn't get much, I'm afraid. He said, well, okay, what about you, Tom? He picked up the microphone, and he said, Mr. DeMille, the cameraman missed taking the lens cap off. He said, I don't have a foot. I'm sorry, not a foot. He said, it's my fault. And DeMille said, well, he said, we still have the long shot. So he picked up the mic, and there was a camera way up in the ridge, a quarter of a mile away. He says, how about you, Phil? He said, anytime you're ready, CB. It's a great story.
You don't know how many times you hear it.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful, wonderful story.
It has to be the only movie joke that actually entered the language. That phrase, anytime you're ready.
Ready when you are, CB.
Yeah.
Now, in 1960, you and Mr. Stewart were up for the Academy Award. Yeah. You for Ben-Hur.
He for Anatomy of a Murder.
Exactly right. And did you bump into each other at the ceremony?
Accidentally, each with our wives, of course, arrived simultaneously, though separately. And, of course, the photographers were delighted to have 2 nominees at the same time, so nothing would do but we had to stand and slap each other in the back and wish each other luck. And this was before men embraced, you know. We didn't do that then. Yeah. And so we did that. And then we were going on into our seats, and as we went through the door, Jimmy took my elbow and he says, Chuck, I hope you win. I really mean that. No actor alive would say that, let alone mean it. And he said it, and he meant it.
In all the Westerns, I read somewhere that, that Mr. Stewart made, I read that in all the Westerns, he wore the same hat. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. I never made a Western with him, but I always wore the same hat in the Westerns I did.
Why?
Well, you get a hat that's right, and it's hard to pick the right hat. And then you want to hang on to it, you know.
Yeah, some hats can make a guy look really stupid, huh?
Yeah, especially a Western hat. And you find the right one, and you hang on to it. No, that makes absolute sense.
Okay, we are with Charlton Heston, remembering Jimmy Stewart. Mr. Heston has produced a book called To Be a Man, which is a collection of letters and admonitions to his grandson, so we'll talk about that and be joined by you on the toll-free at 800-952-2788. I'm Tom, and you're watching CBS.
Need auto
Toll-free in Higgins Lake, Michigan. Hi, Susie. Welcome to CBS.
Hi, Tom. We love your show up here in the
thank you.
North Woods of Michigan. And I wondered if Mr. Heston ever gets back to Higgins Lake, the St. Helen area.
Well, that's where I was raised as a kid in Michigan, and I haven't been. I was in a small charter jet, and I flew over it. Just a few months ago.
It is beautiful.
Oh,
and
I know that.
my mother spent her honeymoon at Lake St. Helen, and your grandmother invited her for dinner. And she was fixing dinner. She was holding you, and she said to my mom, "Here, would you please hold my grandson? I can't fix dinner, and watch him." And you're the grandson that she was holding.
See, I was smaller then.
You were smaller. And that was my mother's claim to fame. She loved to tell everybody that she held you when you were a baby.
Well, she didn't drop me.
No, she didn't drop you. But if you ever get a chance, it's beautiful up here in the North Woods.
Oh, I know that.
I was sorry that your homestead in Lake St. Helen was vandalized and burned down.
That's my grandfather's house, actually.
Your grandfather's house, right. Well, I just wanted to tell you that we're looking forward. Maybe you'll come back to the North Woods and visit us.
Okay, Susie. Thanks for calling, and thanks for telling a great story. Have a great and have a great 4th of July, young lady.
Well,
okay.
you too. Thank
All right.
you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
You know how different your grandson's boyhood will be from what yours must have been in Michigan.
I had an idyllic Tom Sawyer kind of boyhood. You know, hunting and fishing and out in the woods, and it was wonderful.
But St. Helens, Michigan is a town of, what, 100 people, 200 people?
Oh, it's a little bigger than that now. When I was a kid, I don't think there were 100 people in it. There was a one-room school with 13 kids in 8 grades, 3 of whom were my cousins, and half of whom were girls. So, of course, we had no team sports.
Right.
But it was...
and would the one teacher teach all 8 grades?
Yeah, they had a guy about, must have been 20, 22, and he taught all 8 grades. I was the only one in my grade. And when it got your turn to do geography or whatever it was you were to recite in, there was a bench up in the front. You'd go sit on the bench, and he would
do your recitation.
Yeah.
Right? And what would the first, second, third, fourth, sixth, seventh, and 8th graders do while the 5th
They
grade?
would be doing homework or
okay,
exercises.
okay.
You know, the teacher would say, "Now, while we're doing, you get that arithmetic finished now." You know, that kind of thing.
And how cold would it get in St. Helens? Pretty cold, huh?
Oh, in the winter, I remember I wasn't allowed to go out in it, but I was up there one winter when I was a kid when it got to 52 below Fahrenheit. That is cold. They had a thing you'd try to tell you if you were out in it, if you spit and it clicked before it hit the ground, then it was at least 25 below zero, which was useful information.
Now, at some point, you and your family moved from St. Helens to suburban Chicago, to Winnetka, Illinois.
No,
and
Wilmette, but I went to high school in Winnetka.
Oh, okay. And was Wilmette?
Wilmette was where I lived.
And when you went to the Winnetka High School, now all of a sudden there were team sports, but you had no experience with that.
I had never played a ball game of any kind. And the only extracurricular activities I qualified for were the chess team and the rifle club. And that doesn't make for a vivid social life in a classy high school in the North Shore of Chicago.
And what about you? What about your social life? Because now all of a sudden there are females, there are girls in school.
I was not up to that.
No.
I was fortunately when I got a scholarship to Northwestern to the theater school there, and I sat behind the girl that I married.
The fair Lydia.
Lydia, and that was my first date.
And what did you and the fair Lydia Clark do on your first date? Was it a movie or a walk?
We went to have some coffee, and I suddenly realized as we were walking that I had no money at all. And I thought, oh, God, what am I going to do? I've got to find a friend. There's got to be a friend of mine. And there was. Bill Sweeney. May his name be written in the Golden Book. And I said, Bill, you got to loan me a quarter.
Spot, yeah. A quarter.
Well, you could get coffee for a quarter then, 2 cups. And he did.
Well, what if she wanted a piece of pie or something?
Well, no, we didn't get into that.
Okay. So the coffee went pretty good, huh?
Yeah, it worked. It worked.
Yeah.
No, and I fell in love that night.
And then did you and she ever appear in plays together at Northwestern?
Oh, yes, yeah. And in other places, too. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we're going to Britain the 1st of August and to open the Air Museum, American Air Museum. Actually, the Queen will be opening it, but I've been part of that thing. Jimmy Stewart was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll do a tour of Britain in a play for a couple of weeks.
I wonder how many of the younger folks who know who Jimmy Stewart is know that he was a general in the reserve, was he not?
He stayed in the Air Force Reserve after a very distinguished career flying B-24s out of Duxford in England. And he was a brigadier general, and if you're in the reserve, you have to do a month of active service every year. And it's kind of hard to find a posting for a general, but they managed to do that every year. And Jimmy made a reservation at the Ritz Hotel, which I think now they accept actors, but then they didn't. Uh-huh. But James Stewart is a fairly common name.
Right, but the Ritz Hotel in
Madrid.
Okay.
And so he went to check in, and the manager said, Senor Stewart, you are, of course, the film actors. Yes, yes. He said, unfortunately, Senor, this hotel does not accept members of your profession. And Jimmy says, is that right? He says, well, for the next month, I'm Brigadier General James Stewart, U.S. Air Force. And he picked up the key from the desk and walked upstairs. He was not a soft man.
When challenged. We are with Charlton Heston, his book out now, To Be a Man. We'll be right back with Mr. Heston after these messages. On the toll-free in Farmington Hills, Michigan. Hello.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, Michael. I think all of Michigan is calling in to say hi to their boy tonight.
How are you? Nice
to
talk to you.
Hi, Mr. Heston. How are you? I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
First of all, I just wanted to say I'm a kind of a young guy, and I do know that Jimmy Stewart was a general, so I don't know. But anyway, my question for Mr. Heston is, what was the experience like working with Orson Welles in Touch of Evil?
Oh, man, what a very picture. Exciting. Yeah. He was, I think, the most talented man I ever met, which doesn't mean I think he was the best actor or the best writer or the best director, because I don't. But whatever we mean by talent, the capacity to create something wonderful.
To invent things. Like I've read that he would invent things as he went along shooting a picture.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And he was very exciting to work with. I'm very proud I did.
Why did so many people not understand him or not like him?
He was I don't know that they didn't. He was enormously likable. He was unpredictable. Yeah. And once he'd finished the first cut in a picture, the director's cut, which is not the end of the director's work, he then would lose interest. Mm-hmm. And you can't do that. Yes. Because the guys that give you the money expect to get it back.
And then some.
And then they expect you to finish the job. But it was, I learned a great deal working for Orson.
Michael, I'm glad you called, and have a great 4th of July.
Oh, thank you. You too.
All right.
Happy 4th.
Okay. Good night, Michael. You know, I met this man one time. I interviewed a man named Billy Friedkin, the director.
Yeah, I know Billy.
Who's done a lot of pictures, but is probably best known for The Exorcist. Huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he showed me a little piece of AP teletype copy that he happened to be in a radio station the night that Orson Welles passed away. And he saved it, and at the end, you know, they would always say Orson Welles was 70 years old. But that night, for some reason, the teletype machine misstruck, and it said Orson Welles was 70 years odd. And he said, wouldn't that describe Orson to a T? And I said, I guess it probably would. You know, now, you were in the military.
Yes,
What was your biggest command decision when you were in the Air
I
Force?
was in the Aleutians for 2.5 years in B-25. It's a very quiet theater. If they had not dropped the atom bomb, we were scheduled to go to Okinawa to cover the main landings, and we might not be sitting here talking then. Anyone who served in the Pacific has no doubt about the value of the atom bomb. Anyway, so I'm discharged, and I'm now in Great Falls, Montana. And I was a staff sergeant by then. I'm about to be discharged, waiting for discharge. Right. So staff sergeants and up couldn't be given work details. So, but I could be given command of a work detail. So they had a latrine detail of about a dozen guys. And they said, Sergeant, you take these guys around and have them clean the latrines in the area. And they all showed up in fatigues, of course, except one guy who was older than I, which most men were, and taller than I, which most men weren't, and also he was not in fatigues. He was in full dress.
Really?
And
what was his rank?
He also had, he was a sergeant, but he also had a Silver Star and 2 Purple Hearts. So that, and he also had an attitude.
Probably didn't want to clean the latrines.
And he said, son, let me tell you something. He said, I did what they asked me in this war. He said, I went where they sent me. I did what they told me. And he said, now I'm going home, and I'm going to get out of toilets my last day in this uniform. I was with him. I agreed with it. But I thought, oh, boy. And I said, Sergeant, if you don't do what I order you to do, I got to report you, and then we will both be in this camp for at least a month. I said, how about this? If, could you clean the mirrors and change the toilet paper where needed in these latrines? Could you handle that? He looked at me and he said, yeah, I believe I can. You're pretty slick, son. And that was my major command decision in World War II.
So you would come back to New York after the war?
No, first to Chicago, where Lydia had just graduated from Northwestern, and then to New York,
to New York. And along came live TV drama. And a lot of the big movie stars couldn't or wouldn't do live TV.
Couldn't. The studios wouldn't allow them to. Nobody in that had a contract. I'd been, by that time, some years later, I was turning down contracts because I wanted independence and I wanted to continue to do Broadway and to do TV. And finally I got the chance to be one of the lucky kids that got to invent live television. Wonderful, wonderful break.
Any mishaps? I mean, we've all heard stories about missed lines, missed cues, missed entries.
Well, of course, the thing about live TV was you had to get it right the first time. No second takes. But when you're 23 years old, why, you don't realize how hard it is. I was working with Frank Schaffner and Patty Chayefsky and Rod Serling and